The boy appeared at the edge of the cliff before sunrise. Miss Rowan Everly had been awake for hours, watching from her window at the village inn, unable to sleep for the nervousness coiled tight in her chest. She had come to Yorkshire for a position she desperately needed, at an estate she'd been warned away from by no fewer than 6 people in 2 days. But it was the figure on the cliff that made her heart lurch. Small, dark against the bruised purple sky, standing far too close to the edge. A child. Alone. At an hour when children should be sleeping safe in their beds. Rowan didn't think. She simply moved. Her boots were barely laced when she burst from the inn, her cloak flying behind her as she ran toward the cliffs. The wind was brutal, tearing at her hair, her skirts, her breath. The boy hadn't moved. He stood perfectly still, staring down at the rocks and churning sea below, and Rowan's blood turned to ice. "Don't!" she shouted, but the wind swallowed her voice. She was 30 yards away when he turned, 20 yards when she saw his face, young, perhaps 9 or 10, with dark, tangled hair and eyes that held something she'd seen before in her own mirror, not recklessness, resignation. "Please," Rowan called, slowing her approach, hands raised as if gentling a spooked horse. "Please, step back." The boy tilted his head, studying her with unsettling calm. "You're the new governess." It wasn't a question. "I am." Rowan's heart hammered so loudly she could barely hear herself. "And I would very much like to arrive at Ravengate Hall with both of us intact." They all say that at first. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, that they'll stay, that we'll be different. Then come down from there and give me the chance to prove it. For an endless moment, he didn't move. The sea roared below. The sky lightened by degrees. Rowan felt the weight of 100 choices she'd made to arrive at this cliff's edge, at this impossible moment, staring down a child who'd learned not to trust the promises of adults. Then, slowly, the boy stepped backward, away from the edge, toward her. Rowan's knees nearly buckled with relief. "My name is Julian," he said when he reached her, his voice still too old for his years. "My brother Winnie is probably awake by now, wondering where I've gone. Father won't be awake for hours. He never is anymore." Rowan knelt so they were eye to eye, ignoring the cold mud seeping through her skirts. "Julian, why were you up there?" "Testing." His dark eyes met hers without flinching. "To see if anyone would come. To see if anyone would care enough to stop me." The honesty of it struck her like a blow. This wasn't defiance or wildness. This was a boy drowning in plain sight, waving for help in the only language he knew would be heard. "I care," Rowan said quietly, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "I came, didn't I?" Something flickered across his face. Hope, maybe, or the ghost of it. Then it was gone, shuttered behind that terrible practiced neutrality. "We should go back," Julian said, "before they realize I've left. They'll blame you if they find out. They blame everyone for everything at Ravengate Hall. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled." Rowan Everly stood on that windswept cliff, her new position barely begun, and understood with perfect clarity that she had not come to Yorkshire to teach French verbs and proper posture. She had come to save 2 boys who desperately needed saving. And perhaps, though she didn't know it yet, to save a duke who had given up on saving himself. The walk to Ravengate Hall took 30 minutes, Julian leading the way along paths he knew by heart through the half-light of dawn. He didn't speak again, but Rowan noticed how he kept checking over his shoulder to ensure she was still following, as if governesses had a habit of vanishing like morning mist. Tell me about your brother, Rowan said, breaking the silence. Winnie's 7. He doesn't talk much. He hasn't since... Julian stopped walking abruptly. He just doesn't talk much. Since their mother died, Rowan finished silently. Mrs. Crenshaw at the inn had told her the story in whispers over tea the previous evening. The Duchess of Ravengate, beloved by the county, dead 2 years from an illness no physician could cure. The Duke, shattered by grief, retreating from the world. The boys, wild and ungovernable, driving away governess after governess. No one stays past a fortnight, Mrs. Crenshaw had said, her weathered hands wrapped around her teacup. The boys are hellions, they say, dangerous even. Broke Lady Pemberton's daughter's wrist, the last one did. Which boy? Rowan had asked. Does it matter? They're both cursed with their father's temper and their mother's absence. That's a wicked combination, miss. But standing in the pre-dawn quiet with Julian, who had been testing whether anyone would care if he fell, Rowan thought Mrs. Crenshaw had gotten it precisely backwards. These boys weren't cursed with too much feeling. They were cursed with too little receiving of it. Ravengate Hall emerged from the morning mist like a sleeping giant. It was larger than Rowan had expected, all dark Yorkshire stone and mullioned windows that reflected the sky like empty eyes. Ivy climbed the eastern wall in thick tangles. The gardens surrounding it had once been magnificent, she could see that, but now ran wild with late autumn roses strangling their trellises and paths disappearing beneath fallen leaves that no one had bothered to clear. It should have been forbidding. Instead, it looked desperately sad. We go through the servants' entrance, Julian said, leading her around the side of the house. Father has the main doors locked. He doesn't like people coming and going. He knows I'm arriving today, though. Knowing and caring are different things, Miss Everly. The servants' entrance led to a warren of passages that smelled of beeswax and old stone. A single lamp burned in a wall sconce, casting more shadows than light. Julian navigated the darkness with practiced ease, and Rowan followed, her unease growing with each step deeper into this silent house. They emerged into what must have been the main hall, a cavernous space with a grand staircase sweeping upward, portraits lining the walls, and an enormous fireplace cold and empty. Everything was clean, meticulously so, but it had the untouched quality of a museum. This was a house where people existed, but didn't live. Julian Hawthorne, where in God's name have you been? The voice came from the stairs, sharp with worry and anger in equal measure. A woman descended rapidly, tall, perhaps 50, dressed in the black bombazine of a housekeeper. Her grey hair pulled severely back, her face carved with lines of perpetual concern. Mrs. Dorothea, Julian said, his voice going flat again. I was just walking. Walking. At dawn. Alone. The housekeeper's eyes cut to Rowan, taking her in with one sweeping glance. And you've dragged our new governess into your schemes before she's even properly arrived. Miss Everly, I presume. Yes. Rowan stepped forward, refusing to be cowed. Though I wasn't dragged. I saw Julian from my window at the inn and thought he might benefit from some company. Mrs. Dorothea's eyes narrowed. You saw him from the village. That's nearly 2 miles. I have excellent vision. A lie, but a necessary one. Rowan had no intention of betraying Julian's cliffside vigil to anyone, least of all to staff who would report it to his father. The boy had been testing whether anyone would come. She had come. That trust, fragile as spun glass, was not something she would shatter before breakfast. Something shifted in Mrs. Dorothea's expression, not warmth, exactly, but a reassessment. Well, you're here now, ahead of schedule and improperly dressed, but here nonetheless. I'll have Mary show you to your room. You'll want to freshen up before meeting His Grace at 9. Where's Winnie? Julian asked. In the nursery, where you should have been. Go on up. Miss Everly will meet you both after she's settled. Julian hesitated, his eyes finding Rowan's. She saw the question there. Will you really stay? Will you really be different? Go on, Rowan said gently. I'll be up shortly. I promise. He nodded once and disappeared up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Mrs. Dorothea watched him go, her stern expression softening into something that might have been grief. He's been worse since we got word you were coming. They always are. They get their hopes up, you see, and then the governesses leave, Rowan finished. Can you blame them? Master Julian broke Miss Hartwell's spectacles. Master Winston poured ink in Miss Pembroke's shoes. They've torn dresses, hidden lesson books, locked 2 different women in the cellar. They're determined to be rid of anyone who tries to discipline them. Perhaps discipline isn't what they need. Mrs. Dorothea's eyebrows rose. I beg your pardon? I said perhaps discipline isn't what they need most urgently. Rowan met the housekeeper's gaze steadily. They've lost their mother. From what I understand, they've effectively lost their father to grief as well. They're not misbehaving because they're wicked. They're misbehaving because they're frightened and alone. Miss Everly, I know you think I'm naive. I know you expect me to last a week, perhaps 2, before I flee like the others, but I'm not here to break their spirits. I'm here to teach them. And you can't teach a child who doesn't feel safe enough to learn. For a long moment, Mrs. Dorothea simply stared at her. Then unexpectedly her lips curved into something almost like a smile. You're either remarkably foolish or remarkably brave, Miss Everly. I haven't decided which. I've been told that before. His Grace said the exact same thing when I showed him your letter of reference. You may survive here yet. Mrs. Dorothea's expression sobered. But I should warn you, the Duke is not an easy man. Grief has made him hard. He has expectations for his son's education and comportment, and he will not tolerate excuses for failure. I don't intend to fail. None of them did. Rowan didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she asked, What are the rules I need to know? The boundaries? You'll take meals with the children in the nursery unless His Grace specifically requests otherwise. You'll report to him weekly on their progress. You are not to enter the West Wing under any circumstances. That section of the house is locked and off limits. You are not to discuss the Duchess with the children unless they bring her up first. And you are absolutely not to contradict His Grace in front of his sons. If you have concerns about his decisions, you address them privately. Each rule made sense individually, but together they painted a picture of a household walking on eggshells, terrified of disturbing the grief that permeated every stone. I understand, Rowan said. Do you? Mrs. Dorothea's eyes held a challenge. Because the last governess thought she understood too. She lasted 9 days before she encountered His Grace in one of his darker moods and fled in the middle of the night. I have nowhere to flee to, Mrs. Dorothea. This position is all I have, so I suppose His Grace and I will simply have to find a way to coexist. The housekeeper studied her for another moment, then nodded. Come, I'll show you to your room. You have 2 hours before your audience with the Duke. I suggest you use them wisely. Rowan's room was in the East Wing, small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a writing desk, and a window that looked out over the wild gardens. Someone had left a pitcher of fresh water and a vase of late-blooming roses on the dresser, a small kindness that made Rowan's throat tighten unexpectedly. She unpacked her few belongings with practiced efficiency. 3 dresses, all serviceable and plain, her mother's prayer book, a collection of lesson plans and primers. and a small leather journal where she'd kept notes on every child she'd ever taught. The journal was nearly full now, pages documenting 8 years of service, dozens of children, countless small victories and failures. She opened to a fresh page and wrote, Julian, Cliff at dawn, testing, waiting for someone to care. Winnie, age 7, non-verbal since mother's death. Both boys desperate for connection beneath the wildness. Then, after a moment's hesitation, the Duke. Grief has made him hard, expectations without warmth. Dangerous. She underlined that last word twice. At precisely 9 o'clock, Mrs. Dorothea appeared at her door. His Grace will see you now. The Duke's study was in the south wing, down a corridor lined with more family portraits. Rowan noticed that the most recent paintings had been turned to face the wall, another small sign of a household trapped in mourning. Mrs. Dorothea knocked once, waited for a curt enter, and pushed open the heavy oak door. The study was dark despite the morning light, heavy curtains drawn against the day. A fire burned in the grate, but it seemed to produce smoke more than warmth. The room smelled of leather and old books and something else, whiskey perhaps, though it was barely past breakfast. The Duke stood with his back to her, staring at a painting above the mantelpiece. Even in silhouette he was imposing. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the rigid posture of a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. Miss Everly, he said without turning. His voice was deep, cultured, and utterly without warmth. You're early. I arrived in the village last night, Your Grace. I thought it best to familiarize myself with the area before beginning my duties. Familiarize yourself. He turned then, and Rowan's breath caught. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair starting to silver at the temples, and a face that would have been devastatingly handsome if not for the lines of exhaustion and grief carved deep around his eyes and mouth. Those eyes were grey, the colour of winter storms, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to step backward. But Rowan had spent 8 years being studied by employers who saw her as little more than hired help. She lifted her chin and met his gaze without flinching. Yes, Your Grace. I walked the village, spoke with the innkeeper, and observed the cliffs and countryside. I believe it's important to understand the environment in which children are being raised. The cliffs. Something flickered in his expression. Did you see my son up there? So he knew. Of course he knew. Julian had probably been missed immediately, and a house like this would have eyes everywhere. I did, Your Grace. And I brought him home safely. That's all. No lecture about proper supervision? No resignation before you've even begun? Rowan felt a flash of anger, quick and hot. No, Your Grace. A child standing too close to a cliff is not a disciplinary matter. It's a cry for help, which, if I may be so bold, is rather different. The Duke's eyes narrowed. You've been in my employ for precisely... He glanced at the clock on the mantel. 14 minutes. And you're already presuming to lecture me about my own children. I'm presuming to do the job you hired me for, which is to care for your son's education and well-being. Their education, Miss Everly, not their emotional states. I have physicians and clergy for that. With respect, Your Grace, you cannot separate a child's mind from their heart. They learn with both, or they learn with neither. For a long, dangerous moment, the Duke simply stared at her. Rowan could feel Mrs. Dorothea's horror radiating from her position by the door, could practically hear the housekeeper mentally composing a new advertisement for yet another governess. Then, unexpectedly, the Duke's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any actual humor. You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Everly. I haven't decided which. I've been told that twice this morning, Your Grace. Have you? He moved to his desk, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey despite the hour, and sat in the leather chair behind it. Very well. Since you seem determined to survive more than a fortnight, let me be clear about my expectations. My sons will have lessons in mathematics, literature, history, Latin, French, and natural sciences. They will learn proper comportment. They will not run wild like animals. They will not embarrass the Ravengate name. Is that understood? Perfectly, Your Grace. Furthermore, you will report to me every Saturday with a detailed account of their progress. You will not, and I cannot emphasize this enough, you will not coddle them. They are being prepared for roles as gentlemen of consequence. Softness will not serve them. Rowan bit back the dozen arguments rising in her throat. Instead, she said simply, I understand your expectations, Your Grace. Might I share mine? He raised an eyebrow. You have expectations of me? Only one, that if I have concerns about the children's well-being, you will listen to them before making decisions that affect their care. You're asking for collaboration. I'm asking for the opportunity to do my job effectively. Another long silence. Then the Duke lifted his glass in a mockery of a toast. Very well, Miss Everly. You have your opportunity. Try not to waste it by running away in the middle of the night like your predecessor. I don't run, Your Grace. Everyone runs eventually, Miss Everly. From this house, from me, from the weight of what we've lost. He took a long drink, then set the glass down with careful precision. You're dismissed. Mrs. Dorothea will show you to the nursery. My sons are waiting to test you. I suggest you prepare accordingly. Rowan curtsied and turned to leave. She was at the door when his voice stopped her. Miss Everly, Julian was standing on that cliff for nearly an hour this morning. Thank you for bringing him home. She looked back. The Duke had turned to face the window, his broad shoulders rigid, his head bowed as if under some enormous weight. He's your son, Your Grace, Rowan said gently. Perhaps next time you might consider going to him yourself. She didn't wait for his response. She simply slipped out and closed the door behind her, her heart pounding with the audacity of what she'd just said. Mrs. Dorothea was staring at her with something between horror and admiration. I cannot believe you just said that to His Grace. Neither can I, Rowan admitted. Do you think he'll dismiss me? Honestly, I have no idea. You're either about to be sent packing or... The housekeeper trailed off. Or what? Or you might be exactly what this household needs. Mrs. Dorothea shook her head. Come. Let me introduce you to Master Winston before His Grace changes his mind about keeping you. They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, where the nursery occupied a suite of rooms that had clearly once been full of life and light. Now they were tidy but sterile, all the toys neatly arranged, all the books properly shelved, everything in its place, and nothing disturbed. 2 boys waited inside. Julian stood by the window, his expression carefully blank. Beside him stood a smaller boy with the same dark hair, but wider, more vulnerable eyes. Winston, Winnie. He clutched a stuffed rabbit to his chest and watched Rowan with the wariness of a child who had learned that adults could not be trusted. Good morning, Rowan said, directing her words to both of them but keeping her voice gentle. I'm Miss Everly. I'm told you've been expecting me. Julian's jaw tightened. Are you really staying? I really am. They all say that. Then I suppose I'll have to prove I'm different. Rowan moved further into the room, noticing how Winnie tensed. how Julian shifted to put himself between her and his younger brother. Protective, always protecting. But I think we should establish some rules first. Rules? Julian's voice was sharp with suspicion. Yes, 3 rules. First, I will never lie to you. Not to spare your feelings, not to make things easier, not for any reason. Second, you are allowed to be angry, sad, confused, or frightened in my presence. You don't have to pretend to be fine when you're not. And third, whatever happened with the other governesses, whatever you did or said or broke, starts fresh today. I don't care about the past. I care about moving forward. Julian stared at her. That's it? Those are your rules? Those are my rules. Now you tell me yours. Our rules? Yes. What do you need from me to feel safe enough to learn? No one had ever asked them that before. Rowan could see it in their faces. The confusion, the suspicion, the tiny spark of something that might have been hope. Julian exchanged a glance with his younger brother. Winnie didn't speak, but he made a small gesture, pointing at Julian, then at himself, then at Rowan. We stay together, Julian translated. You don't separate us, ever. Agreed. What else? If we tell you something, you don't immediately tell Father. I can agree to that with one exception. If either of you is in danger, I will get help, even if you don't want me to. Deal? Another glance between the brothers, a small nod from Winnie. Deal, Julian said quietly. Excellent. Rowan smiled, feeling the first crack in the wall these boys had built around themselves. Now, I believe we have some lessons to begin. But first, Master Winston, would you introduce me properly to your rabbit? They look like someone with important opinions, and I'd hate to start off on the wrong foot. For the first time since she'd entered the room, Winnie's expression changed. Not a smile, not quite, but a softening, a tiny step toward trust. He held out the rabbit silently. A pleasure to meet you, Rowan said, addressing the toy with perfect seriousness. I'm Miss Everly, and I hope we'll become great friends. Winnie's fingers unclenched slightly from the rabbit's worn fur. Julian was watching her with those 2 old eyes, still testing, still waiting for her to fail. But Rowan Everly had no intention of failing. Not these boys, not this house, not even the broken duke who haunted its halls. She had come to Ravengate Hall with nothing to lose. Now, standing in this sad nursery with these wounded children, she realized she had everything to gain. The Duke summoned Rowan on her 3rd evening at Ravengate Hall, long after the boys had been put to bed. She found him in his study again, the same heavy curtains drawn against the twilight, the same whiskey glass half empty on his desk. He looked up when she entered, and she saw exhaustion carved into every line of his face. The children are behind in their studies, he said without preamble. Julian should be reading Virgil by now. Winston should be speaking in complete sentences. You've had 3 days, Miss Everly. I see no improvement. Rowan clasped her hands to keep them from trembling. With respect, Your Grace, 3 days is barely enough time for them to trust that I won't disappear like the others. We're building a foundation. I'm not paying you to build foundations. I'm paying you to educate my sons. Then perhaps you should spend more than 5 minutes a week in their presence, Rowan said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Children learn what they see modeled, Your Grace. If you hide from daylight, how can you expect them to step into it? The silence that followed was arctic. The Duke rose slowly from his chair, and Rowan realized how tall he truly was, how his presence could fill a room like a storm about to break. You forget yourself, Miss Everly. No, Your Grace, I remember exactly who I am. I'm the woman you hired to care for your children, and I'm telling you that what they need most cannot be found in Latin conjugations. Then you're telling me you cannot do the job. I'm telling you I won't do it alone. Those boys need their father, not just their governess. He stared at her, something dangerous flickering in those storm-grey eyes. You'll quit within the week. They all do. Then I suppose you'll be disappointed when I don't. Sunday brought a rare morning off, and Rowan walked to the village church, desperate for the normalcy of hymns and prayer. She'd barely taken her seat in the last pew when whispers started like wind through wheat. That's her, the new one at Ravengate. Poor dear, she doesn't know. After the service, Mrs. Crenshaw from the inn caught her elbow outside. Miss Everly, a word. They walked to the churchyard's edge, away from curious ears. Mrs. Crenshaw's weathered face was tight with concern. I heard you've been at the hall nearly a week. That's longer than most. The children are making progress. It's not the children I'm worried about. The older woman glanced around, then lowered her voice. The last governess, Miss Pembroke. She fled in the middle of the night, came running into the village in just her nightdress, screaming about shadows and whispers. Said she saw something in the west wing that no living person should see. Rowan's skin prickled. What did she see? She never said clearly, just kept saying the house was wrong, that someone was watching, that the Duchess never truly left. Mrs. Crenshaw gripped Rowan's arm. I know you need the position, dear, but no job is worth your safety. And I'll tell you something else. Don't trust anyone inside those walls. Not the staff, not the housekeeper, not even His Grace himself. That house has secrets that don't want exposing. Rowan walked back to Ravengate Hall slowly, Mrs. Crenshaw's words echoing in her mind. The manor looked different now in the afternoon light, its windows like watching eyes, its silence more sinister than peaceful. She thought of Julian on the cliff, of Winnie's frightened quietness, of the Duke's desperate isolation. What secrets were buried in Ravengate stones? And what would happen when someone finally dug them up? It was Julian who led her to the west wing on a grey afternoon when rain drummed against the windows. We're not supposed to go there, he whispered, beckoning her down a corridor she'd never explored. But we hear things at night. Footsteps, crying. Winnie clung to his brother's hand, his eyes huge. The corridor ended at a heavy oak door, locked and forbidding. Dust gathered thick in the corners, undisturbed by regular cleaning. Julian pointed to the gap beneath the door. Sometimes there's light, sometimes shadows move. Rowan knelt, examining the lock, and noticed something gleaming in the dusty floorboards. She reached for it carefully, a broken locket, silver and tarnished, its chain snapped. Inside was a miniature portrait of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and dark hair. On the opposite side, an inscription, Forever yours, Alistair. That's Mama, Julian breathed. That's her locket. She never took it off. Rowan's heart hammered. Julian, where exactly did your mother die? The boy's face went pale. In her rooms. In the west wing. And your father locked it afterward? He locked everything, her clothes, her things, her rooms. He said... Julian's voice cracked. He said remembering hurt too much. Winnie made a small sound, pressing closer to his brother. Rowan stood, clutching the locket. Boys, has anyone else been in this wing? Any of the staff? We don't know. We're not allowed. Julian's eyes met hers. But someone has. Someone's been going in there. We know it. Thunder rumbled overhead, and for just a moment, Rowan could have sworn she heard footsteps on the other side of that locked door, soft and deliberate, like someone pacing in the darkness. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Rowan was teaching the boys about constellations in the library when the Duke appeared in the doorway. Stopping short at the sight of them gathered around her hand-drawn star charts. She'd expected him to leave immediately. Instead, he lingered. "Orion," he said quietly. "You're teaching them Orion." Julian looked up, startled by his father's voice. "Miss Everly says the Greeks believed that Orion was a hunter placed among the stars by Zeus," the Duke finished, stepping into the room. "I used to teach your mother the constellations. She could never remember which was which." The silence that followed was fragile as spun glass. Then Winnie did something extraordinary. He crossed the room and held up his drawing of the night sky to his father. An offering. An invitation. Alistair's hand trembled as he took the paper. "This is very good, Winston." His voice broke on his son's name. "Your mother would be proud." "She used to draw with him," Julian said softly, "before she got sick. He remembers." The Duke sank into a chair as if his legs wouldn't hold him. "I didn't know. I didn't." He pressed his fingers to his eyes. "I stopped looking. After she died, I stopped looking at anything that reminded me of her, including you. Both of you." "We look like her," Julian said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. "You do. Exactly like her." Alistair's voice was raw. "And I was a coward. I thought if I didn't see you, if I didn't let myself feel, it would hurt less. But it didn't, did it? It just hurt you instead." Rowan's throat burned with unshed tears as she watched this broken man finally see his sons again. If you're still listening to Rowan's story, if you're invested in seeing this family heal, I need your help. We're trying to reach 5,000 subscribers in the next 2 weeks, and every single subscription means the world to us. It tells us these stories matter. It tells us you want more. So please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, like this video, share it with someone who loves a good story. Your support literally keeps these tales alive. Thank you for being here. Now, let's see what happens next at Ravengate Hall. The disturbances began 3 nights later. Rowan woke to the sound of shattering glass and found the library's lanterns smashed across the floor, oil spreading like dark blood. Books had been pulled from shelves, pages torn and scattered. Mrs. Dorothea appeared in her dressing gown, her face ashen. "Not again," she whispered. "Again?" This is what happened before the other governesses left. Destruction. Chaos. They were blamed for not controlling the children. But the children were asleep, Rowan had checked, and the locked door to their rooms hadn't been disturbed. The next morning, Julian's favorite primer was found burned in the garden. The morning after that, someone had rearranged all of Winston's carefully organized toy soldiers into a grotesque battlefield scene the boy hadn't created. The boys were terrified. Rowan was blamed. "You're disrupting this household," one of the footmen, Thomas, accused her in front of the other servants. "Nothing like this happened before you arrived." "Thomas, that's enough," Mrs. Dorothea snapped. "It's not enough. She's filling the children's heads with nonsense about feelings and—" Thomas never finished. He simply stopped coming to work. His room was found empty, his belongings gone. A hastily scrawled note saying only, "I can't stay in this house anymore." That night, the Duke himself caught someone in the West Wing. Rowan heard his shout from her room, and by the time she reached the forbidden corridor, she found him standing outside the locked door, breathing hard, his face pale as death. "Someone was in there," he said. "I heard them." I saw a shadow under the door. But when he unlocked it with shaking hands, the rooms beyond were empty, untouched, exactly as they'd been the day his wife died, except for fresh footprints in the dust. Rowan found the evidence purely by accident. She'd been searching for Julian's missing Latin book when she discovered a loose floorboard in the schoolroom. Beneath it lay a collection of items that made her blood run cold. Keys to the West Wing, a detailed schedule of the household's routines, and letters, dozens of letters, all in the same handwriting. The governess must fail. The children must remain manageable. When they're old enough, the guardianship will transfer as planned. The signature made her stomach drop. Mrs. Dorothea. No. Not the housekeeper she'd come to trust. Rowan read on, her hands shaking. The letters detailed everything. The orchestrated chaos, the manipulation of the children, even the threatening of previous governesses. But why? The final letter provided the answer. If the Duke was declared unfit to care for his sons due to their uncontrollable behavior, guardianship would pass to his late wife's brother, Lord Pemberton. And Mrs. Dorothea, it seemed, had been promised a substantial sum to ensure that outcome. You shouldn't have found those. Rowan spun to find Mrs. Dorothea in the doorway, her face no longer warm but cold as winter stone. You've been sabotaging them. All of them. The governesses, the children. Everything. I've been trying to save them, Mrs. Dorothea hissed. From him. From a father so lost in grief he can't see his own sons. Lord Pemberton would give them stability, structure, a proper home. By destroying the one they have, by terrifying them. They're resilient. They'll adapt. They're children. Rowan's voice shook with fury. And you've been using their grief as a weapon. The Duke's voice came from behind Mrs. Dorothea, quiet and deadly. Get out of my house. The housekeeper turned, her composure cracking. Your Grace, I only wanted... Get out. Julian's accident happened the next afternoon. He'd climbed too high in the old oak tree near the cliff, trying to retrieve Winston's kite, when the branch cracked beneath him. Rowan heard his scream and ran, arriving just in time to see him dangling by his hands 20 feet above the rocks. She didn't think. She simply climbed. Her dress tore, her hands bled, but she reached him, wrapping her arms around his small body and talking him through the descent, branch by terrifying branch, until they both collapsed on solid ground. The Duke found them there, Rowan cradling Julian, both of them shaking. He dropped to his knees and pulled them both into his arms. This controlled, distant man suddenly just a father who'd nearly lost his son. I can't. His voice broke. I can't lose anyone else. I can't. That night, he came to the library where Rowan sat alone, still trembling from the afternoon's terror. He poured them both whiskey with shaking hands. My wife died in that West Wing, he said quietly. She was sick for months and I watched her fade every single day. By the end, I was so desperate to save her I would have bargained with the devil himself. When she died, I locked those rooms because I couldn't bear to see the place where I'd failed her. But I didn't just lock away her rooms. I locked away everything. My grief. My love. My sons. Alistair. You're the first person who demanded I feel again, he continued, his storm-grey eyes meeting hers. The first person who refused to let me hide. I thought if I kept my heart closed, it couldn't break again. But you showed me it was already broken, and that maybe, with enough courage, broken things can be mended. Some broken things, Rowan whispered, remembering her own words from weeks ago. He reached for her hand. Stay. Not as their governess. Stay as what? As the person who saved us all. Spring came to Ravengate Hall like a resurrection. The gardens were cleared and replanted. The west wing was opened, aired and transformed into a music room where Winston played piano while Julian read aloud. The Duke himself led morning walks with his sons, teaching them the names of birds and trees, making up for the lost years with patient presence. Mrs. Dorothea's replacement, a kind woman named Mrs. Peters, brought laughter back to the kitchen. The servants relaxed. The house breathed again. And Rowan. Rowan was no longer the governess. The Duke had asked her to marry him on a morning in April, when the roses were just beginning to bud. He'd knelt in the garden where she'd first taught the boys about constellations and offered her his late wife's mended locket, now repaired and gleaming. "I'm not asking you to replace her," he'd said. "I'm asking you to write a new story with us, one where we all get to heal together." Julian and Winston stood behind him, Julian grinning, Winston holding a hand-drawn card that read, "Please marry Papa," in careful letters. How could she say no? The wedding was small, just family and close friends, in the village church where Rowan had once received warnings about the cursed house on the hill. Now that house was filled with light and noise and the sweet chaos of a family learning to be whole again. On their wedding night, Alistair held her close in the room that had once been locked, now transformed into something new. "You saved us," he whispered against her hair. "No," Rowan said. "We saved each other. That's what families do." Julian no longer stood on cliffs testing if anyone would come. Winston spoke in full sentences, his voice growing stronger every day. The Duke smiled more than he frowned. And Rowan Everly, who had come to Yorkshire with nothing but a desperate need for employment, had found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found home. And so ends the story of the governess who tamed not wild boys, but a household broken by grief. If this story touched your heart, if Rowan and Alistair's journey made you believe in second chances, I'm going to be honest with you. I need you to do something for me. Truly, genuinely needed. That subscribe button below this video, it's not just a button, it's a vote that says these stories matter. It's a message that says keep going, keep creating, keep bringing these characters to life. Every like tells me you were moved. Every comment tells me which moment resonated. Every share means someone else gets to experience what you just experienced. I pour my heart into these stories. I stay up late crafting every word, every scene, every emotional beat, because I believe these tales deserve to be told. But I can't do this alone. I need you. Not just your passive listening, I need your active support. So here's what I'm asking. Subscribe if you haven't. Like this video if Rowan's courage inspired you. Comment and tell me in the comment section, how was this story on a scale of 1 to 10? Share this with one person who needs to hear about healing and hope and second chances. You've given me nearly an hour of your time. You've let me into your commute, your workout, your quiet evening. Thank you for that. Truly. But don't let this be where our story ends. Hit that subscribe button and become part of our community of storytellers and story lovers. From whatever corner of the world you're listening from, whether it's a busy city, a quiet countryside, or somewhere in between, thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that stories still matter. Thank you for letting Rowan and her Duke into your heart. Until the next tale, keep believing in happy endings. They're more real than you think. This is your storyteller, signing off. Don't forget to subscribe. Please, it truly means everything.